what does Leontine Price, rambles, birthday hats, and inheritances have in common? Another episode of Queen Charlotte? Cheerio, everyone. This is D Movie Man, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, of course, I'm coming to you all with another episode of Queen Charlotte, Season 1, Episode 5, Gardens in Bloom. This episode was directed by Tom Verica and written by Shonda Rhimes and Nicholas Nardini. And now, let us commence. So we open up this episode at the opera where the Queen, Lady Danbury, and Violet are all in attendance. We also hear Lady Whistledown speaking about the recent arrival of eligible ladies for potential betrothals to the Queen's sons. However, this also draws attention to the Queen's personal unhappiness. And even Violet herself wonders if the Queen might be the loneliest woman in England. I also wanted to say that when I saw the opera singer on stage, it was absolutely giving me Leontine Price. For those of you who don't know, Leontine Price was the first African-American soprano opera singer to receive international acclaim. Beginning in 1961, she began a long association with the Metropolitan Opera, where she also became the first African-American to become a leading performer. And given the costume that the opera singer is wearing in this scene, I immediately thought of Antony and Cleopatra. I've seen her in that production as far as the pictures and the production design and all that. So I was like, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but kind of seems like it to me. We see a brief flashback to young Queen Charlotte, who is waking up in her bed alone, similar to her future self. We also see Reynolds grappling with the significant pain and torture that the king is now intentionally subjecting himself to. We hit our title card, and then we see the burial of the late Lord Danbury. We also see that Lady Danbury is very much in a state of disorientation. We see her wandering around her home after the funeral at 4 a.m. in the morning, where Coral discovers her. And Lady Danbury is very transparent about how her marriage to Lord Danbury came to be. It was arranged when she was only 3 years old, and she was practically raised to love and value everything he loved and valued. And despite all of her hopes and dreams and preparations, she never quite considered the reality of him actually being gone. And worse, without him there, she is now very unsure of just who she is. She's now been given a new lease on life. But what is she to do with it? During a visit with the royal physician, also accompanied by Princess Augusta and Lord Bute, Charlotte is given a surprising bit of news. She is, at last, with child. It seems that Dr. Monro's discovery has turned out to be true. However, nothing can officially be announced before the quickening, which should hopefully happen before the month is out. Unfortunately for Charlotte, matters are not that simple, because she'll soon be welcoming a very unwelcome houseguest, aka her mother-in-law. As this does concern the future of the crown, she cannot permit herself to leave Charlotte alone for a moment. And I'm just thinking, isn't pregnancy and this situation with George, isn't that enough stress and anguish for a lifetime? We're also going to add an overbearing mother-in-law hanging around 24/7 into the equation as well. Ooh, Charlotte, you have my sympathy. Next, we see Charlotte drafting a letter that is promptly delivered to Reynolds by Brimsley. You can tell that Reynolds is attempting to apologize to Brimsley, but Brimsley is not going for it. He says, "You can deliver this letter to His Majesty. Thank you, and good night." I can't say I blame him. Reynolds attempts to deliver the letter to George, but as I assume has happened plenty of times before, said attempt is thwarted by Dr. Monro, who insists that the king is not quite ready yet. Later, Lady Danbury finds herself meeting with a small assembly of visitors, including the Scythe Smiths and the Duke of Hastings, among others. There's something mighty familiar about that second name. The passing of Lord Danbury has raised a very important concern amongst them. Will the laws of succession for Lady Danbury's son be applied? And if applied, will it be applied for them as well? After all, as she sets the precedent for them all, what she loses, they lose as well. Elsewhere, we see Charlotte sitting down for a wedding portrait, supposedly requested by His Majesty the King. But the usual racial dynamics come into play when Charlotte asks for the painting to reflect an accurate representation of her skin, aka darker, and Princess Augusta requests the opposite. Now, besides the intentionally problematic nature of this, I actually found this to be very intriguing. There's already a lot of conversation about, whether there was some ambiguity in the bloodline somewhere. Obviously not to this extent, and the show is clearly playing on that. But I actually thought the idea of the real Queen Charlotte looking one way and having an artist misrepresent her so that what we actually see is like, what if that's not how she actually looked? Now, I understand, we have historians. I get it. But I'm just saying, I like the idea of playing around with the fact that Princess Augusta is purposely requesting something that's whitewashed and lighter. So I really liked how clever this was, and just the idea of playing around with that idea of history and how that could tie into something real. Matters then get complicated when Brimsley intercepts Charlotte's latest letter, and he realizes that not only is it addressed to her brother Adolphus, she is also preparing to leave the country permanently. Next, we see Lady Danbury taking time to herself, walking in solitude, unchaperoned. And I was watching this scene and it suddenly hit me like, you don't think about how freeing something as simple as being able to venture out on your own, to yourself and spending that time, especially to be a woman in this kind of society and, having to be, constrained into certain roles, especially when it comes to marriage and how you present yourself in society. And so just the idea of being away from all that and being able to just kick your shoes off and be out in nature, it's crazy the things we take for granted. So yeah, that really hit me during this scene. But before Lady Danbury can fully relax, she ends up having an unexpected run-in with Lord Ledger. She discovers that she has now stumbled upon the lands of his estate rather than her own. They have a brief discussion, which Lord Ledger brings to a close by saying that during their next meeting, which will be tomorrow, she should perhaps wear more fitting shoes. Now, I had a thought going through my head, but I was just like, let me just hold off. Let me just see, because I could be wrong. More on that later. In 1815, we see Queen Charlotte introducing her sons William and Edward to Princess Adelaide and Princess Victoria. We also see that in yet another impressive display, Queen Charlotte is rocking a large mountain of hair that is definitely giving me Marge Simpson, with the individual pieces of hair resembling the shape of hair bows. The conversation with Charlotte and her sons is fairly straightforward. These women are princesses. They are graceful. They are capable of bearing children. And they will be your wives next week. We also see Violet and Lady Danbury meeting up, and Lady Danbury is very curious about Violet's recent behavior. We get a semi-update on some of the Bridgerton children, which includes Anthony on his honeymoon, Gregory having a growth spurt, and Eloise sporting a dark cloud in the wake of her fallout with Penelope. Season 3 can't come soon enough. But Lady Danbury is not in the mood for deflection. Whatever it is, spit it out. Violet says that the matter concerns her garden. And Lady Danbury's like, it is winter, the ground is frozen. And to make a long story short, Violet is feeling things she has not felt in a very long time. Yeah, she's basically climbing the walls at this point. Lady Danbury's face during the scene had me rolling. The way she was just like, oh, yes, of course. Like the way she was. But then she also makes the mistake of laughing, which of course leads Violet to flee the scene, so to speak. We'll likely be hearing much more about that conversation later. But in the meantime, we flash back to the young Lady Danbury, who has now arrived on Lord Ledger's estate with riding boots. And this turns out to be the first of many excursions and conversations together, which she dismisses as solitude to her maid Coral. Next, we see the arrival of Adolphus. Excuse me. Duke Adolphus Frederick IV of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Don't want to be disrespectful now. Charlotte is very happy to see her brother, but this is not a social call. She mentions the pregnancy, while also mentioning how ready she is to leave and go back home with him. Despite some initial clumsy metaphors about trees and fruit and so forth, Adolphus has to put it plainly to Charlotte, letting her know that her body is no longer her own, and neither is the child growing inside of it. To leave the kingdom now would be nothing short of treason, and we've already discussed what the punishment for that is. Plus, this marriage and future heir solidifies their alliance. With Great Britain as their defender, Mecklenburg-Strelitz is cruising on easy street. But for Charlotte, it's very clear that this revelation is a heavy one to deal with. In this next scene, we see Lady Danbury and Lord Ledger meeting once more. And Lady Danbury is still trying to make sense of her life now, especially as a widow. Her birthday is next week, but what of it? All that's left now is mourning embroidery and quiet teas with other widows and mourning forever. Lord Ledger tells her that rambles are there. It's funny because initially I didn't know what he meant, but apparently rambles are walks taken for pleasure in the countryside, which is exactly what they've been doing. You learn something new every day. But then Lord Ledger says that he is there as well. And I'm like, yes, as a good friend with a shoulder to lean on? Well, considering the slow lean in and kiss that nearly happens. Lord Ledger excuses himself and leaves, and Lady Danbury is once again left in a state of disorientation and confusion. Ironically enough, this scene also left me in a state of disorientation and confusion because... what? I will just save it for later on in the recap. In the meantime, there are more pressing matters for the young Lady Danbury, who is now meeting with the solicitor, looking for the woman who has not signed her full name. Purposely, of course. Unfortunately, with these circumstances in place, there is no real precedent that will benefit Lady Danbury. She does have a son, but from what he can see, there are no real concessions being made for this to pass on to the next generation. In all likelihood, everything will simply revert to the crown, leaving her lady nothing. And worse, given that the late Lord Danbury also used a sizable amount of his holdings to support their new life together, even the wealth that Lady Danbury thought she had has been greatly diminished. The only option left is to seek the support of a wealthy male relative or to simply remarry. Clearly, this is not an option. Next, we see Charlotte sitting down to dinner with Princess Augusta and her brother Adolphus. It's very clear that Charlotte is mentally and emotionally checked out, and the absence of the king is not helping matters. We see a poignant moment where Charlotte is making her way through the hallway and she stops, and she is clearly on the verge of a total meltdown. We then see Brimsley trying to comfort her in his own way, although he can only do it from 5 paces away. In moments like that, I'm too empathetic to people. Look, if you need a hug, you need a shoulder, a hand, a pat on the back, something, I gotta do it. So, I mean, I get that he was sticking to his job, but that would have been a struggle for me. We see Reynolds and Brimsley meet up, and Reynolds is expressing his fears about Charlotte. And again, Reynolds is being his usual helpful and charming self, which basically means that Brimsley is up the creek without a paddle. Reynolds, I'm trying. I really am, but you are not making this any easier, my friend. In the future, we see Violet and Lady Danbury meeting once again, and they finally have an honest conversation, probably the first in a very long time. Considering that the ton mainly discusses social chatter and marital schemes and gossip in general, it's all the more significant that Violet felt open enough to share with Lady Danbury her honest feelings. She recognizes that they all have gardens, and as far as the situation with her and her husband, it did not bloom because there was never one in the first place. She didn't even know it was possible to have one. And when it did bloom, she nurtured it fiercely. And Violet finally admits, although she didn't think it was possible in all these years, that she is ready to be gardened and gardened as much as possible. Although this scene did crack me up, I also appreciated the depth of it and the transparency. You know, obviously we're in a society where women's desires, their feelings, all that is like, I would say that's on the back burner, but it's not even existent. So like back burner is even like giving it too much. So the fact that they were able to discuss this, especially as older women, you know, and obviously I'm not a woman, but I do know, it's just the idea is like once you hit a certain age, it's just like, you know, all of a sudden you just, none of that stuff, it's like it ceases to exist. And it's like, that's not how that works. Like, you still feel things, you still feel feelings and like all kinds of things. So I thought it was refreshing just to see a conversation where older women and older friends are having that kind of discussion with each other, especially like they said, in this society where everything is about, you know, gossip and mess and all this other stuff. They're like, look, this is how I feel. This is what I want. Let's be honest about it. Later, we see the young Lady Danbury making her way to St. James Palace with her son Dominic, who is now the new Lord Danbury. She makes this very clear to him, while also lamenting the fact that they hardly know each other. The meeting with Princess Augusta and her crew goes about as well as you would think, which of course is not at all. Especially when Lord Bute makes it clear to Princess Augusta that the laws of inheritance are not yet solidified. So at the moment, there's nothing that Lady Danbury can do. But before they fully depart the palace, Lady Danbury chooses to empower her son. Not only did he do his duty and show them who he is also the Lord Danbury, and he will take his rightful place because he is entitled to it. She also emphasizes that he is the son of Agatha Danbury, born name Soma, royal blood of the Pa Mendebo tribe in Sierra Leone. He comes from warriors, and victory is nigh. I said, come through lineage. I love it. I love it. Lady Danbury then arrives home to see that she has a very special visitor, none other than Her Majesty, the Queen. She is there to offer her condolences, sorrows, prayers. But in this case, we know that it is sincere. But when Lady Danbury mentions that the Queen should be resting at home, Charlotte begins to tear up, and she makes it clear that that's no home to her. And what's more is that she has now come to stay with Lady Danbury. If Lady Danbury's face is any indication, this is a big problem. She then tells Coral something I had already figured out. This is not just some sleepover like two good girlfriends, right? The future of the English throne is right here. So to harbor her at her house like some sort of fugitive, yeah, treason, treason, treason. How many times can we say it? And Lady Danbury knows this, so she's like, look, it is time to send for Brimsley and Adolphus. Please come get this girl. Lady Danbury attempts to persuade Charlotte to leave with them, but Charlotte is immovable. She also understands that she has been lied to and betrayed by everyone except Lady Danbury, who appears to be her only friend. And it's only at this moment that Lady Danbury realizes that she hasn't been much of a friend at all, seeing Charlotte as the crown rather than recognizing her humanity. Perhaps they can start all over again, since she too is in need of a friend. I know it's silly, but listen, I'm here for the bond. Imagine having like the queen or the king or just having royalty as a friend. Like, yeah, we're cool. Like, we kick it and we talk, and yeah, and you run the entire country. Yeah, I'd be here for that too. Jumping forward to 1815, we see the long-awaited, at least as far as the queen is concerned, wedding of Prince William about to commence. William tells his mother that he is very much afraid that he will be unable to love this woman that he's about to marry. Queen Charlotte tells her son that love is not something that you're able to do or not do as if by magic. It's a determination and it's a choice that one makes. Taking someone in marriage and choosing to love them. So you hold on and you hold on tight. Because if you don't, then you will be lost. Then we circle back around to Lady Danbury and Lord Ledger. He has brought her her very own birthday hat that he has made because he did not want her birthday to pass by without celebration. To make a long story short, celebrate is exactly what they do.
Okay, I think I speak for everyone when I say, ew.
I'm not sure who asked for this, but it certainly was not me. Spurred on by her brother's lecturing, Charlotte decides to make her way to Kew to locate her husband once and for all. Of course, we see Dr. Monro attempting to dissuade her from doing so, but then she threatens to have the entire palace searched. And good old Reynolds is here to point the way. She finally discovers the king, and she is horrified, as was I, to discover that he is in the midst of being branded with a hot iron. I'm just like, how? You really are rationalizing this in your mind? Like, no, that just, I'm telling you, me and Dr. Monro would have to step outside. Like, whew. Charlotte immediately screams for the king to be untied, and when she said it, I felt it. Like, I could feel the rage, and I felt the relief as soon as she said it. Like, get out of here. She orders everyone out of the room, and she tries to do her best to break George out of the confused haze that he's currently in. Nothing seems to be working until she places his hand on her stomach, tells him about the child that's growing inside her, and also tells him that she needs him to be George again. And thankfully, it works. And as for Dr. Monro, he attempts to explain himself by saying that he only cares about the king's sanity. And Charlotte makes it very clear. She's like, look, I don't care about his sanity. I care for his happiness. I care for his soul. And if he needs to be mad, then so be it. But as for you, you're out of here. And as the past comes face to face with the present, we see the young Lady Danbury experiencing sexual fulfillment for the first time with Lord Ledger, while the mature Lady Danbury finally discovers the birthday hat that was given to her all those years ago. What a mess. And that closes out episode 5, Gardens in Bloom. So look, let me just say this because I mean there was a whole lot I appreciated. I loved, Charlotte making her breakthrough with George, and just there was a lot going on here. But as far as the subject of Lady Danbury and Lord Ledger, look, in theory, sure. In its execution, hell no. One, I feel like if you're going to go out of your way to have this messy, scandalous situation, then, and this is not a knock to the actor, I know it's going to sound bad, but I just feel like if we know how Bridgerton does their casting, as far as how people look, then I would hope that if that's going to be the situation, that she would be with someone who was like, I don't know, some silver fox, some guy who's distinguished. He's older, but, has a certain kind of look. And it just was awkward watching her with Lord Ledger. And like I said, people might go for older folks and that's whatever, but I just was like, I don't, this is not giving what you guys think it should. On top of that, I don't like the whole soap opera-esque spin of it being, Violet's father and him being married. I'm just like, oh gosh. To me, it's just unnecessary mess. I mean, granted, this is a show that's about scandal and gossip and, so you get it, but I just felt like we could have found a completely different scenario for Lady Danbury to, become embroiled in. I'm sure other people might be like, oh yes, Lord Ledger, but I was like, no, thank you. And on top of that, I already know where this is going. You think that this revelation, this bombshell is not going to get dropped and that Violet isn't going to find out about it? No way. No way. So I'm just like, okay, fine. If that's the direction we're going in, then sure. But it's a little too messy for me. And as always, please feel free to leave your thoughts down below regarding my recap and the episode in general. So, once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you with the movie.